Spotify. Everyone will have a nice blue button to click there. I've unenabled the waiting room, so welcome one, welcome all. Hello, hello. Lovely to have everyone here for Module 5 of this kernel block. It's been a great week thus far with Expo Week, and I'll give a bit of context on kind of like where we are in kernel, partially for Simone, but partially for everyone who's been around and maybe could take a second to kind of decompress here. So we're in Module 5 out of the 7 modules that we will be going through for this kernel block, which means that we're entering the home stretch. And that meant that this week was Expo Week, which was kind of like this internal private science fair that was done in kernel that is still in progress, where there was a DeFi and NFT day, there was a DAO and Community Tokens Day, both of which have happened. Many of the people in the audience did some great presentations yesterday and on Tuesday. 20-ish projects per day presented, and we had 25 or so mentors come to each session. So really appreciate everyone who's put their efforts into the Expo Week. It was very well received by the people who attended, and for the people who presented, we're totally all in at this point. Anything that we can do to help as we enter the home stretch of kernel. There's 2.5 weeks left in the formal program, and we will do a kernel showcase at the end of the program that will be even more public in nature if you so choose to participate. So more to come on that. In between, the build tracks are back. We have DeFi session, security session, and a token session next week. Sam Smith is joining Adrian Labas actually for the culture track. That's a really awesome one to come. And many Juntos are coming together on the calendar that look really, really cool as we get back to kind of a bit of wind down time to kind of spend some time together as the block comes to an end. I think the last few weeks have been about building and getting towards Expo. And now we have about 2.5 weeks to enjoy each other's company before kernel block 3 ends. So we hope you take the time to say hello to the people that maybe you haven't talked to in the last couple of weeks as you've been heads down, and take a deep breath because you've gotten past Expo, and we have a bit of time to just kind of hang out and meander through ideas, which we will begin with today. Simone has been a big part of the syllabus. And actually one thing that I want to do for Simone that just so you have a good sense of the audience first is, this is a kernel block. Welcome to kernel block 3. This is kind of your first time joining, and what you can expect from the audience here is just kind of an incredible group of people that will likely engage quite deeply. We'll make sure that Q&A time is left for all of these people from a variety of different educational backgrounds, engineers, designers, artists, builders, the best and brightest people who are entering and have been a part of Web3 make up a kernel block. And there's about 200 per block. Today we have 60 people here with us in person, and it brings together this eclectic group who's willing to listen to Andy and I jabber on about topics on these kernel firesides, but also more importantly gets to know each other through the 8-week experience. And so a part of the modules have been kind of like an ongoing story that we are writing together in terms of what we think Web3 can be. And every week, you've read the module for this week, we take our time to go through 2 modules, one that is more Web3 focused in nature and one that is more personal in nature. And I'll pass the mic here to Andy. This is from a previous module, which is where you were first referenced in module 2. And maybe he can touch on this a bit, also give you a bit of framing on how we got to module 5 through the last 5 weeks.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's one of my favorites SDLR quotes. And because today is really going to be about stories, I thought that I would also just share something personal as a way of beginning, in addition to the gratitudes that I have for Simon joining us, as well as everybody else making the time in what has been a busy week. So Simon was actually the first person that I ever met he was the first human being that I ever met in blockchain in person. I'd been introduced to the concept of Bitcoin by my dad, which is a lovely inversion of the general story, and had worked for a year or so with various people online on the concept of what we then called decentralized collaborative organizations. But I eventually came home to South Africa after finishing my studies in the UK, and Simon and I got together in a bar and discussed what this strange thing called Ethereum that was just about to launch might mean for the future of distributed networks and narrative technology. And it feels like we're coming full circle again to be like, what the hell does this strange thing called Ethereum really mean? And what is the effect it's going to have on distributed networks and narrative technology just kind of 7 years later? So this particular quote comes from the value piece in module 2, which is all about consensus and narrative. And it makes the point that, fiction is the lie that reveals the truth. We've been establishing different kinds of fiction throughout the evolution of human society. One of the most effective of which was the legal fiction of the firm, which Simon has written about extensively. And that now we have these new kinds of mathematical consensus fictions, which allow us to achieve unprecedented levels of coordination. This week's module, having been through the thinking patterns, Ethereum's history, what it means for narrative, meaning, value, trust, freedom, incentives, governance, and how it applies to both taking the web back and internet age institutions. Institution meant more as practice and custom rather than bureaucracy and building. We now move into, well, how are we going to coordinate at scale in ways which are different, interesting, novel, and meaningful? And the first and perhaps most powerful tool that we have for doing this are tokens and the concomitant field of mechanism and market design. The module this week begins with the point that token is a very interesting word with a varied history. In particular, we look at the Germanic and Dutch roots, which is tachen, and it means to teach. So in particular, there is this notion that tokens are tools which can be used to teach by creating factual, verifiable incentives for certain behaviors, both individually and collectively. And we're going to explore this concept of facts, especially how facts relate to the shared mathematical consensus fiction we have established. And in particular, the pro-social aspects of these particular facts and what kinds of information they can transmit about our relatedness, about our interbeing, perhaps. And there are two very particular aspects that the syllabus goes into, which I don't think we'll necessarily get to because we want to explore Simon's work because it's foundational for so many of us in the industry. But the syllabus itself focuses very particularly on discoverability and moderation, which come through particularly in the piece on Amazon and looking at some of the other older mechanisms that have been designed online prior to the rise of blockchains. If you move into the next slide. The other aspects, as Vivek always mentions, there's this personal aspect which goes along with the Web3 dive into discoverability, moderation, tokens, mechanism design, and that is listening. Listening and the impact that it has on our ability to tell better stories. And I think there are some wonderful quotes that Vivek has curated on this slide. And the other thing that I kind of wanted to just pick out from that piece is that the best listeners are gardeners, right? It plays deeply on this notion of humility that we've been trying to build up throughout the syllabus in terms of you can never really know the impact that the code you write, what sort of second and third order cybernetic effects it might have on these vast distributed networks where, as Simon so beautifully said, the state and processing capability of any program is known and available and public to any other program. There's no longer this concept of network and data disparately put together, but everywhere there is data, there is network, and everywhere there is network, there is data. And so we have to be gardeners. We have to cultivate the space within ourselves and the time within ourselves to grow the most intentional ways of being and writing that will allow us to tell better stories with this new order of language that we have. And it's particularly the kind of humility required to see any conversation as an opportunity to plant seeds in another mind, while simultaneously also using the nourishment implied in any interaction to help sprout new growth in the manure of our own experience that I'm interested in this conversation. So the next slide will talk a little bit about incentives. Incentives, again, something that I would prefer to ask Simon about rather than speak in my own words. What I will say is that, language which is persuasive is that which performs what it says. So if I'm going to tell you about what I think is funny and I am not myself funny, then it's not very persuasive. And this has this kind of self-referentiality in the persuasive nature of language and how it can be used to design pro-social mechanisms and incentivize positive behavior is something that we will look at in the course of my quick fire fireside questions to my dear friend, who I think now, if you go to the next slide, we can introduce. And
Sure.
Vivek.
I'll do so very briefly, and then Simone, if you have any thoughts, additions, clarifications, or ideas that you'd like to share based on what we've done, feel free to do so. Simone, I got to know while he was the co-founder of Ujo Music when I joined Consensus in early 2018. He was working on a project that was focused on the intersection of crypto and the music industry and how digital property rights and things like NFTs and DAOs might be useful constructs for that industry about 3 years ago, and was immediately drawn to the variety of things that he had been working on, and those have only increased since then. As the Gitcoin ecosystem started thinking about radical markets and the work that Glenn Whale was doing, Simone worked on a project called This Art is Always for Sale, which used harbinger taxes in a really interesting way. He went on to work on another project that was more recently released in that space, Neolastics. Previous to that, and perhaps why he might be one of the best people to have for tokens and mechanism design and why we're so excited is that he worked on the ERC20 standard early with a large group and was one of the primary people working on tokenized bonding curves, and genuinely was kind of like the inventor of that idea on Ethereum. Curation markets, NFTs, community tokens, all of these things are things he spent time on. And somehow he managed to write his debut novel, Hope Runners of Gridlock, along the last 3 years, which he genuinely took a lot of time away from, I think, a bunch of crypto stuff to do, if I understand correctly, and came up with something beautiful that was a story that allowed us to see a bit further out and to explore what some of these technologies might look like in people's lived experiences. So Simone, would love for you to add or change or make any comments to the introduction that we've given you to Module 5.
That's a very comprehensive introduction. Trying to think if there's anything more. I think the one thing I might just add here as like a background is, as you can see, like I've quite a broad interest in many things, but the core thread through it all, and this is something I realized later, is that I enjoy creating things. And one of the reasons why is that because when we create things, we tell stories, whether it's code or writing. I also make music. I enjoy speaking. All these things are just different ways to tell different stories. And so, right from writing a novel to creating artwork to writing about these things have always just been about sharing stories. And that meant that me being a creator also manifested itself in trying to build platforms that allow more creation and thus more stories. So I guess that's a good way to tie in up there.
It's really wonderful because it's actually my first question to you, and the thread which will run through hopefully this whole discussion is, how can we use tokens to tell more creative stories collectively and to better coordinate In fact is kind of always stranger than fiction. So what are the most strange and creative facts you've seen established by this shared mathematical consensus fiction of ours?
Yeah, it's I think it's still, we're still seeing sort of the rippling effects of tokens and tokenization, and what came from Bitcoin and then eventually Ethereum and then ERC20 standard and tokens and tokenization. I can give sort of a more of a background why I got into this thinking initially back in the day. This was around end of 2013, when the only thing that was around was basically Bitcoin, and then there were some altcoins like Litecoin and some other derivatives that have since disappeared from the zeitgeist. But then there was this lovable, cute meme that became the face of the new coin that we now know as Dogecoin, that came around at the end of 2013. And that changed like everything for me in terms of how I view what the power of the technology can be. Because what it meant is that the improvement that Dogecoin brought to the table was that it wasn't any technical improvement. It wasn't like this thing is technically better than the other coins. It's not using a different hashing algorithm. It's not using a wildly different monetary policy. It's just it's on its surface, it accrued value and still is valued by people today because it merely represented something. So it's like it represented this funny meme, and through that process, it allowed people to connect with each other by having this token represent something that they all cared about. So whether you with the recent pumps and dumps and all this kind of speculative market action, there is still some goal here, which is like people connecting with each other, and that framing helped me sort of extrapolate on that by feeling like, okay, if this works for Dogecoin as Doge as a meme, that we can create like monetary value from a meme, what else can we do? And from there, it just, my mind blew up. It's just like, it could basically be everything, because like language, we can inscribe tokens as is put here with different facts. And when you hold a token, that in itself is an act of speaking. So it's just like the fact that you buy something and hold it, you're trying to say something to others, but also to yourself. So it's like, I believe in what this represents. And the fact that you can now do this on a scale without requiring a nation state to create these kind of tokens of value, or slow legal systems like company equity, it's like that made me believe like there's so much potential here and I needed to get involved on like a mass scale. That's when Ethereum came around. It's like, this just makes it so much easier for people to do this rather than just clunky forking things in GitHub and running like C++ code and stuff like that. It was super difficult. That's when I was like, okay, Ethereum's going to make it easier. I need to help build this token standard. And that's how I got to helping design the ERC20 standard. And I still believe that's true today, that we've seen at least that some of that hypothesis still holds true, right? But we're still busy figuring out what the final forms of these things should look like, and such that it brings forth its positive aspects, but not the negative externalities of maybe like too much speculation, too much greed, or leaving people behind by causing them to lose too much money. So yeah, I hope that gives like a good context.
Yeah, I think that's if Doge did two really good things, the one was to bring Simon de la Rouviere into the crypto ecosystem, and the second is yet to happen, but I remain a believer. And one day I hope to see Gary from the Decentralized Dance Party get a Nobel Prize for Peace for partying all around the world. And I bring that up because I love Gary, and if he ever watches this, Gary, you're the best. But also because it's one of these great stories attached to this aspect of representation and the way it gets us to relate to one another, which I have always loved and which has been so far out there that it might just be doable, right? Like that for me was like the ultimate moon thing, was like, yeah, these guys are crazy Canadians, but there's actually this weird possibility that we could host a party all around the world that would induce some more peaceful states between people. And the work that the DDP did was really fascinating. Plus, they had a great time doing it. So are there other stories like this which are strange and wonderful and enable coordination that kind of stick out for you, that are perhaps less told in the history of these things, as we focus on, as you say, hashing algorithms and proof of work versus proof of stake and all of this other stuff?
I think like, I mean, Doge to me is like a very shining example because it was like, the first good example of things succeeding just based on what it represents rather than any technical features. But it's not to say that all the other current cryptocurrencies and tokens don't have that, right? It's like, if you say to someone, what does Bitcoin represent? People might give you certain examples of, they feel like it represents like a more libertarian community and these certain ideologies. Or if people say, what do you feel like Ethereum represents, or Ethereum Classic, or Polkadot, or all the various tokens that exist out there today. But if there's any other interesting stories, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything that like stands out as much as Dogecoin does for me in my past.
Simon,
Yeah.
There's a question in chat from John that is
Mm.
kind of relevant,
Mm.
kind of wanting to hear more about the process of designing the ERC
Oh yeah.
standard, and stating that not much seems to be more permanent in terms of a story that has worked in the Ethereum space. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I can talk to that. So I think it was just very ad hoc initially because the original token standard was designed by Vitalik. It was just called Meta token, or Meta coin standard. And there were some other protocols that were experimenting with additional tokens like Counterparty, and back then it was Mastercoin, which is now Omni. But in Ethereum, it was like a more sort of blue ocean. So it was like there wasn't anything to go by at that point. And initially, the two features was just something you should be able to transfer and something where you should be able to give someone else the ability to transfer on your behalf. And the process was quite ad hoc. I started working, creating implementations of it in Solidity back in 2015. And then the first DevCon was coming up in London, and I gave a presentation on tokens there just because it was like, for me, it was like, this was the obvious first use case for Ethereum, and we need to like get the community coordinated on a standard before everyone goes and does their own thing. And back then it was just Augur, Gnosis, the prediction market teams. There were some decentralized exchange teams like EtherX. MakerDAO was also there. They were early contributors. There were a bunch of people just interested in the standard because they were designing systems that included tokens and tokenization. And then after I gave the talk at DEF CON 1 in 2015, Fabian Vogelsteller, who created the the issue on GitHub, went and created the issue, and then we all started chatting in the issue on GitHub, and there was no other process besides just engaging with people in that GitHub issue. There was no calls. We didn't jump on calls or anything. It was just like hashing it out on GitHub. That being said, it probably took longer than we anticipated because it's like, because it was all new. But people said this felt good enough. And usually in the case with standard setting, someone needs to take the leap and be the first one to make the mistake. But luckily, as let me put this correctly, as John mentioned, it turned out to be quite decent standard. So I think nowadays there's still some things where people have legitimate critique about, stuff about approval, and especially with Ethereum being much more used now, it's just like, why are there several transactions for one action? But people back in the day, people didn't think about gas being too much of an issue, gas cost being too much of an issue, or it was like, let's think about it later, which probably was the correct choice to make, you know, in terms of simplicity versus complexity. And obviously solidity also changed, the EVM also changed over time. So I think now we probably just changed that a bit. That's probably the one bit. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's like a fairly simple standard. But if you go read the GitHub issue, there were some strange design choices that back then, or what you would look like now in hindsight, you would go and think like, why did we ever consider these different options? But you know, that's the process to simplify something which you don't know what the future will look like. But I guess I'm happy with the outcome, the result.
Simon, I had some questions about community and personal tokens, which we'll come back to, but what you're describing here kind of reminds me of something that you wrote in Infinite Game Storytelling, which is another whole aspect of questions that I want to ask you. But there you wrote something really interesting, which was something along the lines of, you know, infinite stories have all been accidents. They weren't entirely engineered, and their existence sort of thrives on how well these infinite stories can attract collaborators. So, you know, can you tell us about, like, it seems as if most of the design process, especially in those early days for these really critical standards like ERC20, was mostly accidental, and yet this kind of somewhat accidental feature of things is precisely what attracts collaborators through these serendipitous interactions. And are there other examples of surprising collaborations which have happened for you in the last 10 years that have the same feature of, there is a lot of engineering and thoughts and care and effort that goes in, but also like it's kind of accidental. and how has that played out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I chalk up a lot of what feels like success as luck and just being in the right place at the right time. But obviously, I always feel like the way to increase one's luck is to keep the dice rolling, you know, so as a metaphor. So that's why I always felt like, I think it also came from the fact, like growing up in South Africa, that I always felt like I had to sort of punch my way into being noticed. And so a lot of early habits was around just writing a lot, writing and publishing a lot, and like hoping someone takes notice and just trying to be in the conversations. And so there were a lot of like fortuitous, serendipitous things that happened that allowed me to continue working in the space. I mean, at the end of 2014, I ran out of money and I was like, I want to continue working in the space. And then I get a message from the first employee at Consensus saying like, hey, like, we love what you wrote. We think we'll pay you to work in this space. I was like, someone's gonna pay me to do this stuff? This is crazy. All the way from South Africa. I don't have to move countries. Like, this is crazy. And so I talk it a lot just about staying in conversations and just chatting to as many people as possible, and like so aptly put, like listening as a response as much as possible, just because I'm always trying to learn anyway. So if people are telling me their stories, I want to listen to hear what they have to say. So yeah, a lot of the stuff, even like token bonding curves, came from staying in conversation with a lot of people. Like initially was Macho, Pinsky, and Meher Roy, which we spoke back and forth for like weeks at a time back in 2015, 2016. And then once I had ideas down, I shared like white papers with people, and you can go look at some of them back in the day, and it has like, I'm thanking like 30 to 40 people in the bottom for feedback. You know, so it's like, it's a constant back and forth, and in that way, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants is an apt metaphor. Yeah.
Do you find that collaborating with so many people gives you energy or can be draining? Because both of these are possibilities, and I wonder, you know, sometimes it seems as if it has to do much more with personal inclination and one's kind of conditioning and tendencies and personality, but it also seems as if it's like a skill that can be cultivated, the ability to collaborate with a lot of people, and not only to collaborate with a lot of people, but to get energy from it, to really enjoy and benefit from those kinds of wider coordination games that these kinds of things enable.
Yeah, it's a good question. There was a period in 2018, 2019 where I was like very burnt out on a lot of this stuff going on, just because there was just I I I I was like I really wanted to be where I got, and to say no to things then became much more difficult, because I felt like I was saying no to my younger self. That was like the 14-year-old kid trying to program and sell his games online. It's like, this is where I wanted to be. And so it became just super difficult to say no, but then I burnt out. And so I realized, okay, well, I have to also say no to some of these conversations when more people got involved. At least early on, it was like, there were a handful of people that cared about these things. And so conversations came more easily. But now when it's just like, it's super exciting because now so many more people are sharing ideas and like collaborating, bringing forth like exciting innovations that I'm not even up to date on and couldn't possibly stay up to date on. It's super exciting, and diverse opinions from all across the world. And then it becomes a skill, you're right, in terms of like figuring out how to continue productive collaboration, but while still maintaining like self-preservation in terms of like not like burning out.
Yeah.
So, and it's hard. That's hard. I probably still don't know the right answer.
Well, but I wanted to touch on it because I think this post is one that I also really liked and has clearly taken hold in the community tokens and DAO space. And I know Simone and I were talking in advance of Simone you joining, and it's possible that she might want to chime in here too with some of her thoughts. But this idea of seasonality in terms of collaboration, and Simone, just for context, last week we asked Simone to come. We would have asked him to come every week if he had the time, but he was deep in a coding kind of like bender, working on something interesting that maybe we'll hear about some point in the future.
Monday.
The point being that he was not in the particular headspace to come and like share. At that point, we're very grateful that he's able to join this week. And this seasonality in token communities has seemed to take root, where you can say, okay, for a set period of time, for a cohort, let's say even in the kernel context, we want to get together for this 8 weeks. It's going to be a period that has more collaborative energy. We, in the kernel context, are trying to maintain the personal kind of journey along with the collaborative journey, but you just know that in this 8 weeks, you really do have the dedicated energy of people much beyond yourself. And this helps a lot because you know that you have access to this. You know that you can get the collaborators who you then can write about at the bottom of your blog posts, but you also can spend the time and know that even in the future, this group, Kernel Block 3, for example, we hope will be a resource to anyone who's here right now. And just like having that support structure is really nice. Simona talked a bit about kind of like the downside case and what still feels like in DAOs, some, let's say, chaotic or nebulous energy. And I don't know if Simona, you want to speak to that, and maybe Simon can riff on kind of his thoughts on where DAOs are. Simona, you're out there.
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Hi, Simone. Hello. So yeah, Vivek and I were just chatting, and obviously this whole kind of movement towards DAOs and this whole talk about how we are evolving, particularly from a cultural standpoint, how we are evolving the way we organize, the way we collaborate, the way we pull resources together, the way we decide things, the way we create things. It's such an interesting evolution. However, there's so much, I personally feel, that holds us back from the things that we have learned in the past, that holds us back from really kind of embracing these new ways of doing things that really empower individuals. And yet they're so nebulous in terms of, okay, how do we do this? How do we structure this? What do we agree on? Who comes up with these things that we put in place? And it's almost like a shift from that waiting for things to happen to making them happen and everybody kind of participating in almost like this dance of making it happen. Right now, we're all going on the dance floor and you're kind of like, at a school dancer is like, who's dancing? I don't know. This is really shit. Or I don't like the music. Exactly. Or doing some sort of robot or like, that's how it feels like. How do we turn that into like a really cool club? Is essentially what we need to get to.
Yeah,
I feel that's like the best analogy ever.
Yeah, I mean, like it's strange to actually put the dance club metaphor in there, because I always felt like a good metaphor for me to understand how we collaborate is by the metaphor of a party. It's like, if you're like 3 or 4 people, like you seem to be able to manage conversations, everyone talks in the same group, and then you add like 2 extra people, and then conversations seem to splinter off a bit, and then they come together in a big circle and splinter off a bit, and then as the party grows, like different things happen, and then you realize, oh, if you add like 1 more person here, the whole dynamic of the social experience changes, and obviously that then grows from there. It's like from different sizes of how then we form tribes, and then we form cities, and then we form nation states, and then we form different kinds of communities. And that DAOs is like good examples of like new forms of communities. But I feel like what's interesting, at least to me, about the crypto space is like a lot of it's happening accidentally, like in good reason, just because you have this powerful tool that brings people together. It's like, yes, we can all bet on some future together, and that provides this good gravity well for attention and social coordination. But we are to some extent just like falling around, awkwardly dancing, as a good metaphor, through the process. But I honestly, I think the right answer, or one of the answers at least, is that I think there's still a lot we can learn from what exists before. It's just we've kind of stumbled into this stuff, and there's really good literature and stuff just from traditional social organizations. Like, how does large co-ops manage their stuff? How does large organizations work? How does large clubs work? How does existing online forums do their stuff? How does like good Discord servers like manage their communities? Like, there's probably a lot of stuff that exists. It just needs to like be tried in these contexts where it's just like, okay, here's a tool set for how co-ops are managed. Let's see if we can use this in DAOs and how DAOs are managed.
Sure. I'm gonna pass.
Really,
go ahead, Simone.
That makes me think of Elinor Ostrom's principles. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
it's such a good blueprint. Yeah.
Right. I'll find the link and I'll share it. But it's crazy that not more people in the space are utilizing those and looking to those as inspiration, as some guidelines in there, or some steps. Let's say, taking the dance thing into that metaphor, continuing
but
it.
It's also just accepting that like, to do anything that's like that you want to have a good outcome with it, sometimes it's just hard work.
Yeah.
Like someone has to do the work. And you can't just go, oh, there's some tokens here and some smart contracts here, and like the rest will sort of magically happen. It's like, no, that just provides a protocol and a set of rules such that we can all try to agree on. But there's still other stuff that needs to happen around this thing, around these protocols and tokens, for stuff to happen in a good way. And that's just sometimes comes from doing the hard work.
Yeah. I want to pass the mic to Anne, who's working on a project called Black Magic Bank in Kernel right now. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, hi. So my project is I'm trying to build a US federally chartered credit union that uses DeFi. Just kind of a little elevator pitch, and there's a lot of other things I'm doing with that. But one thing that's coming up, and you kind of both mentioned this, was about, kind of knowledge that is old, that is critical for the growth of crypto, and how I think that there's a lot of reinventing wheels when none of this stuff, in my opinion, is new. A lot of it's actually return, and I have this kind of thesis: return to indigeneity, right? And return to maybe pre-colonial thought that was kind of eradicated in a lot of places in the world. And I guess my question to you guys, or to I guess Simon specifically, is how do our personal journeys and our emotional states and all these things interface with how we conceptualize building something? Because for me in my project, how I conceptualize building it is very personally connected with my belief system. And it is represented in how my project's unfolding. And I think that's a connection I want to hear your thoughts on. And I think is a connection that is undervalued within crypto. And it's almost like people think that these things just magically appear when they appear like through our understanding. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I love that. Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I think it's very important that we do surface these personal journeys or reasons why people do or both things. It's something I try to take with my creative practice as well. Like for my novel, I wrote 3 blog posts on like why I wrote it, and that is part of, I believe that's part of the experience of reading the book, is you should also go read why I wrote the book. And I think that's important. And I think one way to also explain it is, let's say you have 2 similar organizations, right? On the surface, they all look the same, but there's one where there's someone driving it that has a strong belief about why this organization matters or why it should matter. And there's a strong sense of integrity and authenticity as to why they're doing it. That organization, if everything else stays the same, will probably succeed over the other organization. It's because if you have a strong personal journey and reason why you're doing things, you're going to attract people to your cause, just because like it adds to the story, but it also gives people a sense of belonging in that if you're committed to that specific future, I can come along with you and participate in building that future with you. So instead of it sort of not necessarily believing it or coming from a different background, which is not necessarily important for that specific organization, I do think it's very important, and it will. I think it's always something that will just add to the character of an organization. Yeah.
Yeah, and just something I want to add. I saw this in I think it was on Twitter. Maybe Alex, yeah, if he's here, shared it. But talking about Coinbase and how they kind of were like, we are like a non-political or an apolitical organization. And how in my belief system that really that is a political statement, right? That is a statement, whether it's against or for, however they're conceptualizing it. Like, I think there's this idea that with a lot of people building that, who they are does not connect with what they build. And I think that one thing I appreciate about a kernel is that the kind of, that's why I wanted to bring this into the conversation, like how the personal affects, right, everything we do, and how that's not a bad thing, right? How that can have benefits 100%. And negatives and all these things, but how that's just something to contend with and think about rather than a negative.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's also that kind of thinking. Something that also sometimes helps is to make people realize what's the end goal, not 5 years from now, but the longer term end goals. Why? We shouldn't be building organizations just to have organizations. We shouldn't be building companies just to have companies. We should always have specific goal that's what's the longer term impact or outcome that we want to see in the world. And companies are tools, organizations are tools, tokens are tools that help us build this future. We choose whatever that is. So yeah, 100%. That's great input.
Thank you very much. So to continue peppering you with my own personally biased questions, one of the interesting aspects of the work that you've done on tokens as tools for teaching new different ways of being, organizing, expressing one's principles, expressing one's creative impulse in the world, the post that Vivek showed, one of the really interesting pieces of that was that the seasonality of community tokens can be used to incentivize and program pro-social behavior, productive investment rather than parasitic investments. And in the context also of personal tokens, which seem somewhat separate from community tokens, you're talking about how personal tokens can thrive primarily on the ability to capture new kinds of value. And you mentioned Mike Merrill and Jonas Lunt and some of the examples of this even prior to blockchains. And the kind of core question that you ask in that personal token piece is, can personal tokens enable new agency through enabling stronger forms of social coordination? And the answer that you give is sort of via gratitude. So if I can extend personal gratitude tokens that only I can mince and use a bonding curve behind it, then this can be like an interesting sort of representation of value. But what's most important and what links it to community tokens is that, like, you then say that, well, if you have a bonding curve behind a personal token and you're using these two tools in tandem, you can actually sort of, that token can be extended to represent something more than just the individual. And you give a very concrete example of this in the concept of a label. So you could have like Simon.greatcoder tokens that you give to people who you believe are great coders. And if you believe that this person is a great coder, I'm probably going to trust that opinion and be like, yes, this person is a great coder. And the other example is like Vitalik.greatcontributor. And like, if Vitalik gave me a great contributor token, I would definitely hold on to something like that. And so, even in that work, you're talking about personal tokens, but personal tokens which exceed the boundaries or play with the boundaries of what an individual is and what it means to represent value in that way, such that it could perhaps have productive rather than parasitic possibilities. Have you seen any interesting work along this notion of labels? And how do you think of this relationship between, personal tokens that exceed the individual and feed into sort of more seasonal community tokens?
Yeah, the personal token space is still interesting. I mean, this was one of the reasons why I started working in this space. And I think back in 2013 after Dogecoin, I penned an article. I think this was December 2013. It's like, in 10 years from now, everyone will have a personal token. And it's been 7 years, 8 years, I believe. So we'll see if the next 2 years still pans out in that regard. But I believe some of my opinion has changed over the years. I think again, like, economic tools shouldn't be the end. The goal should be a means to an end. And if it's not servicing those ends that we want to see in a social society, in our society, then they shouldn't exist just for the sake of it. Like, we shouldn't have like speculation just because we can. It's like some market liquidity might give advantage to certain communities, but it shouldn't be at the cost of like people being exploited in some way. It's like there's always the personal token conversation also tends to fall in line with the conversation about people doing income sharing agreements. It's like, is this actually indentured servitude in some way? It's like this kind of like awkward line between like, here's a powerful economic tool which allows you to bet on your own future by getting capital now, but you have to like do something else with it later or give something back later. But at the same time, if it's not done for the right reasons, people can be exploited. Right. So it's interesting, and that's why like the first tokens also have a social outcome, which is like it's good for the individual and good for the community. Then that's at least a good direction to go to. Yeah. But I don't think we've seen too much of those kind of personal tokens, to be honest. It's mostly just been like personal funding mechanisms. That then tries to become a community. Yeah,
that's true.
a lot of discussions still to be had.
Yeah, of course, everything that you say there is completely accurate, and particularly this points about indentured labor and just another version of wage slavery, to be honest, except more efficient and exacting and easier to manipulate. But the point in that post, which I really, really liked, was this idea of gratitude, right? That's, if it comes as a representation of gratitude, speaking deeply about like representation and the way in which it can be used to coordinate around more creative storytelling. Gratitude seems to be not just something kind of fluffy and nice, you know. There's this beautiful song that I like, the lyrics are always sort of echoing through my head. It says, love is a choice every morning, not some fuzzy feeling in a room. And what struck me about that post was that, like, when it comes to personal tokens and they're linked to wider communities of value, gratitude is a choice gratitude is an engineering choice, not some fuzzy feeling. And yeah, that was just a little thought of mine. And if you'll let me carry on, one of the funny parts of what you've written about sort of infinite game storytelling and this notion of playing with boundaries is that, and you're quoting the guy who wrote
James
Infinite Games, it's Kars, right? Yeah. And he says, we laugh not at what has surprisingly come to be impossible for others, but over what has surprisingly come to be possible with others. The joyfulness of infinite play, its laughter lies in learning to start something we cannot finish. How does this influence your work, and what has made you laugh most in the last decade?
Interesting. It's interesting because that quote, I seem to have taken like a different choice recently about like wanting to start projects that I can finish, mostly because like I don't want to feel like I have to. I think it comes down to the burnout point earlier, where it's just like if I start something that seems to have an indefinite future, like I feel obligated to keep participating, and then that drains me a lot. So that's why, like, if I write a novel and it's done, I can go, it's done, and I can move on to the next thing. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. I guess in some sense, like, you write and it's done, but I will continue to be a writer. You know, I will continue writing things because I really enjoy it. I think that will be something that has no end. I will still enjoy writing and continuing to write. What has made me laugh in in this space? I think the one big thing is like what I actually liked about the Ethereum community over the years, particularly, is that there's a lot of people that don't tend to take themselves too seriously, you know. So it's like, yes, like let's build the future that we want and we believe can empower people and using this technology, but then, you know, let's dance on stage and look silly and stupid. You know, doesn't matter. You know, that's not going to be the thing that makes something succeed. So let's have some fun along the way as well.
I wanted to share module 6 of the gaming track. I put it in the chat, but this Slack thread starts off Paul's post on the Infinite Game. It was when the Kernel Gaming Guild got together for a game night and played Among Us, which in and of itself was a very finite game. Let me be very clear. And I was a loser of this game more than I was a winner. If you ever play Among Us with Paul Gotti, know that he is always the imposter. But he did add this wonderful Slack message to the post on finite and infinite games, and our instincts around kernel are very much guided by this book that Simon also references, and the ways that we hope to structure kernel into perpetuity, and that we think Ethereum and Bitcoin and many of these open source protocols seem to have this structure built in more naturally than, let's say, tech corporations, if you just look at the two in their structure. It's just interesting to think about. And put this quote in the chat, but this is one of the main kind of like grounding parts of the book. There are at least two kinds of game. One could be called finite, the other infinite. Finite game is played for the purpose of winning. An infinite game for the purpose of continuing the play. And in the kernel context and in a learning context in many ways, it's always the case that learning and teaching go hand in hand. And learning is better informed by being a teacher in some context, and that there will always be more people, hopefully, who are interested in learning as we continue to grow this wonderful group of human beings that are into Web3, that are in this world, that are that have to leave this world, right? Like these are all concepts that are tied together with the infinite game. So it's a really important part of the syllabus that we actually are just starting to get into in modules 6 and 7. Cool. Andy,
Time
if
for some Q&A.
Yeah.
As always, I mean, I have lists of questions, but there are some really interesting questions in the chat.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So I want to start kind of from the top. Simon, this might start to get a little more scattered given how many different things you do in Web3. I want to start with Sarah and her question on the music industry, because we haven't touched on that much. But Sarah, it was a great question that Simon definitely has thought lots about. Maybe you could kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for choosing my question. It feels a very small question now in the context of all the very grand, important things we've been talking about. But I was just, I guess, interested to know, so the NFT music scene, it doesn't seem to be sort of almost as big as I feel like it should be at the moment. And I follow this Top of the Blocks Twitter account, which for any British people, anyone familiar with Top of the Pops, is a bit of a skit on Top of the Pops. And the music on that is almost like, I don't know, I call it like meme music. It's not necessarily the music people would listen to. So I guess I'm just curious to hear your opinion on why you think there's kind of the music industry hasn't necessarily embraced NFTs, or is there a lot of action behind the scene? Is it a community problem? Is it a learning curve problem? Just, yeah, interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it makes a lot of sense. That's the kind of stuff we tried to do at UJA before we shut down the project. Was to experiment with NFTs merely because it creates, I guess with most NFTs, right, it creates a connection between fans and the creators, in this case, the listeners and the musicians. But I think a lot of the more different cases of NFTs that is just because it's still a new medium, right, for people to understand. So it's just like when people see a musician having an NFT, they think it's like it's an artwork that has musical components to it, right, rather than it being music first, right? So that's why crypto art is the first use case of NFTs, because it's just fairly represents like models or frames of understanding that we're familiar with, because art comes in like a box and you can see it. You know, music doesn't necessarily come in a box like that. Well, maybe it used to come in a box like that, but nowadays it doesn't. But so I just think it's time, really. You know, I think just time will bring that forth more. And I think musicians particularly, it's going to be very useful for them as the time goes on, as a different revenue model. So yeah, I might be wrong. We'll see.
One follow-up, Simon, might be like,
yeah,
you know, I agree that it seems like in the music industry, the NFT media form is still relatively misunderstood. Are there examples of people who you think are doing cool, specific NFT experiments that are in the direction that seem like where, you know,
yeah,
we're taking it the right way?
Yeah, I think I see Colton Brown mentions catalog works. I think that's also stuff we try to think about a lot at UJA, was like, what would this look like, or what would this eventually represent the experience that you want? Like, do you create the feeling of owning a master recording and people can make like prints of the master recording? Is it more like the audiovisual experience? Like, do people want to own parts of a music video, right? Or is it just, do people want to own parts of the song themselves? Or is it like a separate experience, like merchandise as a NFT? Like, there's different examples here. And I think for the most part, none of what I've seen has been wrong. It's just, I think it's more like, what would be the thing that most fans would want, rather than it being something that's in the hands of the musician.
Yeah.
Because like when you think about it, it's like when you create merchandise, you do go through the process of branding and creating something that you think fans would want to wear. That's separate from the music that you're making. So maybe it's just the process of like incorporating that as part of the creative process of musicians.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The one
not
that
sure. Yeah.
I keep yelling about, everyone here has heard me say, is just like the fan-to-fan experiences. Why haven't we thought as deeply about like how to get the Kendrick Lamar fans who are so into the music that they probably will like each other into interesting social spaces together? But yeah, I'll be excited to see how it goes. Let's see, Florent.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, it's quite possible that the NFT technology will change music itself. That's the great thing about music. Every few decades, new technology comes along and the music changes, 100%. Like with synths and things like that. So maybe this is the new music we have now. Sorry, carry on, Vivek.
It's also possibly exciting.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Cool. Florent, you had a question on typical token distributions versus bonding curves. Maybe expanding there. We could go to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Vivek and Simon, for the time you share with us. I'm a big reader of your blog because I mean, since 2-3 years we're trying to tokenize street art, and so obviously it's a big source of inspiration. And like the hamburger tax, for example, could make sense in the public art space, and I also looked closely at bonding curves, but I see the advantages of those, let's say, creative crypto derivatives, but I'm wondering if complexifying, all this process is not compromising kind of the transparency and the understanding, of what you try to do compared to the benefit that those derivatives could bring. So yeah, like my question was more general about how you can like when best to use bonding curves, but it also relate to this point of complexifying, the whole experience.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that's still, it was a bigger issue in the past, and it's still an issue today, is about like the complexity of explaining the value propositions. But if you end up going like, here's why you should care about like putting like your intellectual property on the blockchain, and okay, I need to explain to you what the blockchain is for you to care about. It's like no one wants to read like an essay before you start using the product, right? And so it's always this difficult trade-off between like going, what should be a black box? But sometimes you can't leave stuff in the black box. You need to explain what's in the black box for people to get why the stuff matters or why we want to use it. So it's always like a difficult interplay. And that's why like stuff like DeFi is popular, or like why it succeeds is because it attracted a group of people that did the due diligence to also understand what blockchains are, right? And how they work and why you would want financial tools on the blockchain. But it's a harder thing to sell, to say like a creative person that maybe isn't technical, that isn't going to want to go read up on why or what a blockchain is. But it's interesting, even like 5 or 6 years ago, when the first subscription revenue platforms came out, like Patreon and Subbable, like if you go read some of the website language they use, like people really had to explain to people like, you're going to pay someone, but you're not going to get anything in return. You're just going to pay for it because you want it. Like people were just like, strange idea, but now it's sort of, yeah, we all subscribe to stuff like Patreon and Twitch and YouTube and whatever. So maybe sometimes stuff just takes time, and sometimes some things work and some things don't. And the same answer, I guess, for bonding curves versus traditional token models. Yes, like bonding curves require explaining some parts of it, and some of it's counterintuitive. It's like, oh, you're increasing the supply. Isn't that a bad thing? It's like, no, technically not, because it's like, it's also increasing the price at the same time. So it depends. It depends on the use cases, depends on the experience, what you want. The initial reason for bonding curves, or why I worked on that, was I wanted a way for a community to mint a token without there being one central authority that's the issuer, right? So it's not like, oh, I have a new protocol or a new project or a new community, I mint like 1 million tokens and then sell it to everyone. It's like, no, the smart contract comes first. The smart contract defines how the tokens are created, and it gives this relationship between supply and price and keeps some funds in a collateral and reserve in order to create this ability for communities to form themselves without waiting for someone to be the instigator. And so in that case, I think it's a good system, but then again, you need to explain parts of it. So it does still bump into issues of complexity. But even now, still today, like, you know, MetaMask has 5 million users, and it's like a lot more than we ever anticipated people would care about this stuff. But even now, it's like when you look at some stuff happening in MetaMask, like you're telling me this stuff is doing things that I have no idea what it's doing. So I'm just trusting you that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So it can still get better.
Totally.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Great question. Anyone else have questions? There are some in the chat, but if anyone wants to speak up with one before I kind of scroll through.
Yeah. Can I go? Thanks for this, Simon. You know, I have a question. I don't know if you thought about if you know, you see a danger in where tokens can sort of like, there's this great tool that allows people to coordinate in all sorts of way that they decide, but that it could lead to sort of like a more siloed type of internet, right? It's sort of like Telegram. It's a great tool to coordinate, you know, groups to chat, but perhaps there's this argument that we're missing, that some of this discussion will be happening on the open web, accessible to everyone. And the same way tokens could be, you know, limiting in that sense.
Yeah, that is a concern. That is a concern in terms of it becoming more siloed as a result. You know, people putting up these gates, and to get into the gates, you need these tokens, and you can't see the conversations unless you have these tokens. That is not ideal, I believe. But I would still probably say that the communities and projects and DAOs that will succeed will be the ones that train towards more transparency. But that's just a belief. I don't know if this will be what the future looks like.
Yeah.
I only go from the fact that we've seen what succeeded in open source, and we've seen what blockchain projects have succeeded thus far, is projects that trended towards more public access, more openness. But who knows? It might change. There might be more like token gated discords and things where people are having conversations where it's just hidden.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that concern. But I agree with you.
Yeah, I wanted, maybe if Andy, you have any thoughts here. I mean, there is one thing that we really didn't go over from the syllabus, which is these two ideas of discoverability and moderation through tokens as kind of like two big global things that we hope happen, even if in smaller private silos like token gated communities. There could be some of this adverse kind of like type of behavior. Andy, is there anything worth sharing there, or any other thoughts that you have?
I think that's, I shared many of my thoughts in the video that is linked at the beginning of Module 5. And while we have Simon, we should pick his brain as thoroughly as we can. And where I wanted to kind of extend perhaps some of the discussion, Simon, was, I mean, as everybody knows, you were the originator of bonding curves. And I think that the way in which you've described it in response to one of the questions was really perfect. I wanted to do two things. The first was to sort of ask you a little bit more, because I think that it speaks to discoverability and moderation, but in your own terms about, you know, you've been thinking about automated economies for a really long time. You've implemented one with Neoelastics. And what it really is this deterministic generative artwork from the chain tied to a bonding curve. And when you have a bonding curve with an NFT economy, it can grow and shrink based on demand, which sort of partly at least solves the problem of this, you know, how large should the collection be, which is the problem of the order of where is the discussion happening. Discoverability and moderation have lots to do with one another. And your answer, at least with Neoelastics, is, well, the market can decide how large the collection should be, right? And the reason that this is interesting and the reason that it's potentially complex and difficult to get your mind around is that the market of art is so close to the actual artworks. They exist in the same medium, that it creates this sense of self-awareness while still allowing us to sort of pursue new and meaningful and beautiful art. So perhaps you can tell us how the market has been performing so far in this new decision-making role that you've handed to it. And then I will sort of come back to one other question about metamodernism.
See, yeah, it's been interesting to see. I feel like especially with Neolastic, it's behaving in the way I wanted to see or expected to see it, which is you have there's two outcomes. Like one, based on supply and demand, the collection will grow and shrink and then settle what seems to be an optimal amount, what the market deems to be an optimal amount. But the second thing, which is probably the more important thing, is by virtue of there being a way for people to sell and remove their art pieces from circulation, you end up with, in a way, this market-based curation system where the pieces that are left are the ones that people want. So the ones people don't want get thrown out and gets removed from the supply. So what you end up is like people are by just having their individual choices of what nice pieces to own, they are collectively curating this collection. But the interesting thing though is that this, especially with Neolastic, there's still some hard-coded parameters, which does still impact the eventual outcome. And that still is unknown about what choices one should make. It was, I think my choice back then was the first one should cost $1, right? And that was like when Ether was $1,000, right? But then inevitably, if you mint, say, the 1000th piece in a thing, then it's going to cost a lot more to mint the next piece. So you are inevitably creating some kind of cap economically on the size of the collection, which is a good and bad thing. In this case, part of the art experiment was to show what's going to happen or not. So yeah, it's been interesting to see that. And I think that also comes in the point of discoverability and moderation and curation, is that with blockchains and tokens, you can add more economic signals. And it's also, I see in chat as well mentioning, I see Mike is also on the call, like Idea Market, which tries to surface certain signals with bonding curves, and various other forms of signals, right? And using tokens as that kind of economic signal. And that's still ongoing experiments. And yeah, I always try to take economic experiments and put them into art projects because it's more interesting.
Yeah, it's much more engaging. And, I think that's actually one of the people who will be joining us next block is Gene Coogan, who is heading up Abraham.ai. And that's really sort of extending your notion of this autonomous artificial artist, not just autonomous economies, but AAA, we're now getting into similar language to 2008, 2009, but in the art sphere, which is much more exciting and engaging and potentially creative. What's most interesting about that particular project and their approach is, to build this autonomous artist who's really going to sort of set tasks for a community of stakeholders to continuously improve itself. And I wonder if that also has to do in part with an answer to Mario's question about like the potential negative effects of this, is that like through iterative experiments based on the creative expression of what might be valuable and market-based mechanisms to define the parameters with that nevertheless play with the boundaries, how can we begin to think of this thing of continuously improving ourselves? How do you imagine that, and what do you imagine that phrase to actually mean?
Yeah, it's good points, and I also see Romain talking about like the rise of more like algorithmic control and like especially now that you have algorithmic control plus economic incentives plus platforms that tend to be immutable and hard to change. Like there is definitely dystopian futures here where like the protocol is too strong for humanity to combat, and then we're sucked up into the system, and doing things to the demand of our protocols, and then we serve the protocol and not the protocol serving us, and that is not a good future. But you're right also in saying, Andy, that we can also accidentally stumble into that future just by iteratively, continuously exploring. And to be honest, the best thing is just to have conversations like this, like communities like Kernel, to just keep asking us questions such that we are aware of what we're building. It's like, let's also continue having conversations with more people. Let's have conversations with people we don't usually have conversations with. Talk to I think it's in Canada said earlier about talk to indigenous communities about how stuff works and how they manage themselves. So there's a lot we can learn that is out there, that mistakes that we shouldn't have to make, but that all just comes from trying to do the extra work.
I think that's I mean, A, it's a great and insightful answer, and B, I think that you actually already give some of potential ways of navigating and processing through this in some of your other posts about the novel that you've written, because this thing of like, are we going to end up serving our protocols, or are our protocols going to serve us, is solved by both and thinking, right? Like we will be served by our protocols, but we will also serve our protocols. It's always been the case. We just don't necessarily think about it consciously. The tools that we build design our world and then act back to design us. And there's this constant dialogue between us and our environment, us and our tools, us and those that we're in relationship with. When you walk into a Gothic cathedral, you are put into a very particular and highly crafted and designed state of mind based on the size of the building, the massive open spaces, the colorful tinted windows. All of these things are meant to induce a particular state of mind in you. It's designed that way. It's not accidental or divinely revealed necessarily. And it's the same thing, I think, with these kinds of protocols and the notion of service. I think that it's both and. And the reason that I raise that is to get you talking just a little bit. I mean, this both and thinking informs a lot of how Kernel operates, but also is at the heart of Hope Runners of Gridlock, your approach to metamodernism and optimistic nihilism. And there are a few sort of choice quotes that I wanted to pick out and then get you to talk a little bit about Unfrontier. You say in one of your pieces that Flora reconstructs herself when she realizes that she had no choice. It's okay to be nihilistic, but still to pursue meaning. And it's this reconciliation of opposites that sort of can help us reconstruct some kind of grand narrative without thinking that we have to choose one narrative. And this to me was one of your most fascinating insights out of all of the novel work that you did, was there are ways, like the meta-modern generation understands that we can be both ironic and sincere at the same moments, and that they don't necessarily diminish one another, and that there are ways of reconstructing these grand narratives without forcing one narrative onto ourselves or indeed onto others. I wonder if this approach to both and thinking, storytelling, narrative, and the whole thread of relatable sharing and coordination that we've been drawing out in this discussion has led you to your work with Unfrontier, and if you would like to share some of that before Monday.
Yeah, I think landing up on meta-modernism as they describe it as a framework of understanding rather than a tool set. But I also feel like it's actually a good tool set as well to approach narratives. For me, it came from like just general meaning making, trying to figure out what gives me meaning in, say, the current state of the world that we're living in, when sometimes things seem nihilistic or not optimistic. And then sometimes feeling like, oh, if you're the person that's hopeful about the future, you kind of feel like oh, he's that loser, thinking optimistic, like, like, he's probably naive. Like, are you naive to be hopeful? Um, and I understand sometimes where it comes from. Like, sometimes, like, hopefulness can be naive. People are like, yeah, let's build a future where we all hold hands with each other and forgive all the shit that happened in the past. I'm like, there's still stuff we need to solve about what happened in our past in order to pave the way for a good future. Well, a lot, but so writing about metamodernism and putting in a book was also a way to have that conversation with myself. So that's also why I write, like, partly to share these ideas with other people, but also to write to understand how I feel about these things. And that's, without too much spoilers for people that still want to read the book, that's part of the core arc of the protagonist, is to get to this metamodernist perspective, is to to accept the nature of their world, which seems dystopic, but also understand that the systems that they're embedded in can be hopeful, can be dystopic, depending on how you look at it. And it's okay to accept that those different perspectives exist. You don't have to choose one or the other. You don't have to say that this is just dystopic or this is just hopeful. You can say both. So it's an and both thinking. And yeah, I mean, it definitely helped me to understand it better and improve my own frame of reference for what I want my own future to look like. Yeah. It's also partly came from, like, I got involved with Ethereum blockchain technology because it felt like I could make an impact on the world, make the world a better place. And for a long time, I enjoyed writing because I also wanted to write fiction in the future. But it always felt like if I was writing fiction, I was like giving up on saving the world. There's that one of my other favorite quotes by E.B. White is, on some days I get up in the morning torn between the two sides of saving the world and savoring the world. And to me, it's like part of that process of writing the novel was also bringing those two things together, which is like, sometimes it's okay to say, like, we don't have to save the world today. We could just enjoy the sunshine a bit, but we don't have to feel guilty about that. Tomorrow we can save the world, and then the next day we can savor it a bit more.
Cheers to that. Pass it to maybe Anne, and we have Paul with maybe time for one last one after Anne.
Yeah, I just want to throw something in about nihilism. Nihilism is a perspective, I think, that, specifically within, like, I think, like, there's like coders and, like, a lot of identity demographics I've come into contact with have a very deep connection with nihilism. And I've come to, like, define this thing called, like, hegemonic nihilism. I was talking about in the chat, where I, like, feel that just because things are meaningless doesn't mean things are purposeless or things are empty. And I think that, like, there's this kind of, like, when I say hegemonic nihilism, because it's the most understood one, right? But it's like nihilism is just kind of description that, like, like biology, like evolution, like there's no, like, meaning to that. But that doesn't mean it's, like, devoid of any sort of feeling or joy, or, like, it's like there's this, like, interplay between, like, what people, I think, make nihilism to become and then what it actually is. At least, I'm not a philosopher, and maybe Andy, more about nihilism, or, Simone, but, like, I think that there's, like, at least in pop psych, right, there's a kind of, like, people extrapolate it too far, where it's like, we are humans and we have feelings that are biologically encoded, and, like, those things are real, right? And that doesn't mean, like, just because there's no necessarily purpose or meaning doesn't mean we can't have joy and laughter, and, like, this motif of dancing has been coming up a lot.
Yeah.
It's like we have these feelings, and those feelings shouldn't be ignored. And I think that, as we build things, I like to think about nihilism and exactly, right? I like to think about nihilism in that way, where I'm like, nothing has meaning, but I want to create, right?
Yeah.
And that
100%,
those things aren't
yeah.
those things aren't mutually, like, exclusive. They're, like, things that can work in tandem.
Yeah, I think one way to put it as well with, like, the metamodernism idea is that sometimes we exist, when we exist in life, we try to avoid confusion. right? Which is like, I want this world to make sense in a certain way. It's like either you're going to be super nihilistic or like super hopeful, or like believe it's the end of the world is coming, or like no, it's not. It's like we want to like avoid confusion, avoid being uncertain. But metamodernists were like saying, no, like choose that as your state, like that, choose that as your state and your state of conversation. And to come back to the dancing metaphor that we so much love, it's that feeling of being in the middle of a dance floor and being like messy and like bumping in and making mistakes, falling over your feet. That is the feeling that you want to get to, not confusion. You want to feel like you're on a dance floor somewhere. You know, I love this metaphor. It just goes so far. Good thing I also like dancing. So yeah.
Oh wow, we never even talked about Simon's dancing. Yeah. Anyway, we'll save that for the next fireside. I wonder. I think Paul, so. Paul had what I think was a very practical question, which I'd love him to ask about, just like what's coming next in the Ethereum story. You know, we have tokens and bonding curves, and I'll let Paul answer, but want to add just a flavor of that question. You know, what's next in the story? Maybe you can touch on the practicalities of Paul's question, which Paul, feel free to ask. But if there are broader parts of that story that you hope are coming soon, maybe that's a good place to end. Paul, anything?
Sure, Vivek, I think that's a good way to ask it. Maybe just to set the background, I think what Simon has done with token standards and bonding curves is really foundational to how Web3 has evolved. So what's the next thing that we should be working on, I guess, now that everything of this is being used by all of these DeFi Legos? What's the next thing that hopefully will get us all to dance? I don't know, something that would change the state of Web3.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, because like in the past few months to a year, like my own sort of entry point into the space and what I wanted to see and the stuff I worked on, much of it's coming to fruition in various forms. Like it's like tokens doesn't exist, let's try to make that happen. It's like NFTs doesn't exist, let's make that happen. Like let's make tools to empower creatives, and like, oh, new financial tools. I can take out a loan anywhere in the world. That's pretty cool. Like a lot of these things are coming true. It's like even like metaverses. I wrote about like decentralized virtual worlds, and it's like all this stuff is coming true. And my own space of where I am in terms of my own thinking is like it feels like it's like this, there was this new blue ocean and we filled it up with like new inventions and new things, and I can't seem to see beyond it yet. It's like I don't know what lies behind here, except there's probably still stuff that I would still like to see, like Andy mentioned Gene Kogan's project with the autonomous artists. Like that's super interesting. If I wasn't doing Untitled Frontier, I would have been doing that. But it doesn't seem like it's 0 to 1 kind of innovations. It's just like we have now all the tools. Let's just put them together in cool and interesting ways. But I think the harder parts that's still to come is just like now it's just like the technology can't stand by itself anymore. And so the harder work now really becomes about how this stuff really gets meshed into society. And it's we're going to bump into things like, you know, stuff like the good and bad about the El Salvadorian government making Bitcoin legal tender. It's like that's like messy social stuff. You know, it's like this is not just about the technology and playing around over weekends and stuff. It's like now it's making serious impacts, and that's hard. That's hard work that you know, isn't about like super new technology and new things. So to more broadly answer the question, I don't know what's next. I need to do some of that exploration myself and see what's to come. So for now, I enjoy telling stories, and that's what I'm focusing on. So yeah, that's what Untitled Frontier is. So that's like the project or company I'm working on right now is telling stories, creating cool NFTs, and trying to prove a model for a future where writers and storytellers can earn a living, just seeing something different. Yeah.
Amazing. Everyone should check it on Frontier. I know we're at time. The last request from Simone in the chat is a dance party with Simon next time with a kernel playlist. and I think that we'll make it happen.
Needs to happen, needs to happen.
Thank you, Simone. It's been a pleasure having you, and thank you for all you've done, both with us, but also the writing that you've done.
Thank you very much. This is like, you know, there's sometimes one comes through the space and then like sometimes get disillusioned or burnt out, but then you come into community like this and you feel nourished and energized to keep building new and interesting things and sharing ideas. So thanks for what you guys do. It's really cool.
Awesome.
Ons
One
is
last
verlief
thought.
op jou. Ons is verlief op jou, Simon. Ons waardeer dit. Baie dankie.
All right, before these South Africans take us too far away, I'm going to put this link to GatherTown. There's only space for 25, and I'm sure people have to go, but I'll be hanging out in there if anyone wants to hang for 10 or 15 before the next thing of the day. But thanks again, Simon, Andy.
Thank you very much.
Ask questions. See you guys soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye. I'm just going to keep putting the GatherTown link in. If anyone has trouble with GatherTown and is trying to get in, let me know. We should have space for 25 before they make us pay. I'm gonna hit it, see if anyone joins. Bye, everybody. Okay, we got like 5 or 6 friends in here. I like that. Cool. All right. See you guys in Gather if you want to join the link. bit.ly Cafe Kernel. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Cafe Kernel.